All right. Well, everybody's getting their view sorted out. David, let's jump right into your book, first of all, as a starter. What motivated you to tackle this topic of diet, drugs, and dopamine? What was on your mind what was the gap that you wanted to address with this book?
So, as you mentioned, um, I had the opportunity, the privilege of, you know, uh, 21, 20, actually between 2020 and 2022, of having gone back in to government service for a second round. And it was a pretty intense period for all of us on um, COVID. Um, and, I think that those 2 years, I mean, a year before, sort of during the campaign, and then January 20th, 2021, going in at noon to sort of co-lead Operation Warp Speed, um, and very intense period. Didn't leave my computer for 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, you know. And we got to the other side, 676 million vaccines. Well, whatever you think, I understand there's some controversy about all that. But whatever you think, it was one of the great feats. I don't think any that will ever be replicated for our government being able to take on something that big and actually deliver free 600 million vaccines within 5 miles of everybody. And we all got to the other side of that, and I found myself 60 pounds heavier. And I had gained weight and lost weight throughout my life multiple times there over, and weight was the great sort of mystery of why could I can do, I think we all, I mean, no doubt, all have a lot of, determination, control. We put our minds to certain things, we can focus. One thing I couldn't do was wait. So I found myself 60 pounds heavier. And I had written some books on food, but sort of as a respite from COVID. I thought I would just, take on weight. And then, these new anti-obesity drugs happened, and I wanted to understand how they work. But it opened up the door, really, with the major health issues, that are facing this country. I had not fully recognized how things converged. And that was the beginning of the book. And,
Yeah,
that was the effort.
one of the statements in your book that really hit me was, and I wrote it down, the self-control theory of obesity has outlived its usefulness as a change agent in behavioral treatment.
Yeah, I think that if the drugs have their strengths, they have their weaknesses, their limitations. But the one thing that they do show is that it's they work through biology, right? And so it's biology that's at work. Um, and
Why don't you give us a brief description of how the GLP-1 agonists work and why they've been so incredible compared to all the other obesity treatments that have come down the pike?
Yeah, it is, there's still some debate. There's still a lot to learn. And I don't think the company's fully level with the public on what's going on. Um, but there's certainly, in essence, they slow down GI motility. They delay gastric emptying. Food stays in your stomach longer, right?
So
Um,
you feeling of satiety.
there's a gut brain, as part of the hindbrain, and the gut. They're obviously connected. There's the area of postrema and the nuclear tract solitarius, not to wonk out on the neurobiology, but food stays in your stomach longer. And when food stays in your stomach longer, right? We've all experienced that in other contexts. If you have the flu, right, and slow down GI motility, right? How do you feel? I mean, it's if you have food poisoning, right, and it attacks the GI motility, has an effect on GI motility. So what these drugs, I think, do, not in everybody, and it's pretty humbling. We still don't fully understand the biology, but these drugs, in essence, and it's the aversive system. I mean, there's an aversive system that protects us against poisoning that slows down the GI tract. So they sort of take you to the edge of nausea. And what's the one thing, that edge of nausea? So you get conditioned. If I put any more food in your stomach, right, how are you going to feel, right? And you're going to go, ugh, right? I mean, when Dan Drucker, who did the original biology on this, injected these in laboratory animals, these drugs, the animals didn't move. He coined the term visceral malaise, right? This fatigue, this general feeling of being on this and that's just food staying in your stomach longer. But I mean, there's real advantages. I mean, so you, in essence, and everybody's different. There will be people who take these drugs and lose weight, and they just say they don't feel anything. But if you really ask them, you have, when you start putting the biology together, I mean, the story. So you have this aversive system, this delayed gastric emptying. The reason, I mean, why, why do you overeat in the first place? There that you have the opposite system. You have the reward system. So you have fat, sugar, and salt stimulating the mesodopaminergic system. Yeah, we've all heard this term food addiction, and I think that's real, but it's a continuum. Food addiction is on one side, but there's no doubt that highly processed food, is designed, it's formulated, the fat, sugar, and salt to stimulate that part of the brain. So you have that reward system, which is very powerful, right? It gets us to come back for more, right? And then you have what's strong enough to overcome that or stop that. You have this aversive system, right? So you have these, if you take me to the edge of nausea, that reward system is going to be, you put the brakes on. So what's ironic about this is if you look at this ultra-processed foods, the industry's learned to, we can talk about what happened there, but it's part of the picture. That food is designed not only to stimulate the brain very rapidly, but to be absorbed very quickly. So you have that food, very quick gastric emptying, very quick absorption, right? So you have ultra-processed foods that, you're one industry making billions of dollars, making us sick. And then you have another industry that delays the gastric emptying, that delays that rapid absorption, making billions of dollars to slow down. So that's where we find ourselves as a country. It's not a great place to be, especially when you understand the consequences. And that's what the real awakening for me. A lot of docs, a lot of friends on this call who I haven't seen in a while, and they should chime in. But I think the recognition, and I mean, and I think it's taken medicine a long time to get this. Yes, we always knew weight wasn't good for us, but it's really not about weight. It's really about this toxic fat that accumulates in our belly that gets into our organs. And increasingly, whether it's cardiologists, nephrologists, obesity medicine docs, endocrinologists are recognizing that toxic fat that accumulates in places, in our midgut, right? I mean, in the central abdomen, that ectopic obesity, problems, it gets into the liver, it gets into the pancreas, it gets into the heart, it gets into places where it doesn't belong. And it basically is responsible for a vast amount of cardiometabolic renal disease.
So let's, we have all of us are.
I'm wondering whether people should chime in whether they agree or not agree, and what their experience is. Certainly, a lot of people have a lot of expertise on this call, so I certainly don't want to monopolize it. But that's the general view. I mean, I think this, I'm sorry, Doug, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just
No,
love to hear what others want to say too, please.
of course, anybody wants to jump in, but do we need to think about it differently for those of us who are in our 70s compared to our kids or our grandkids? I mean, when is it, when do we need to start intervening? Is it too late for us?
Yeah,
Or is it, or do we focus on our kids or grandkids for this kind of thing?
so,
What would you say
so,
about that?
yeah. And look, there's no doubt. I mean, you could reverse, I mean, you can't cure, but you can reverse type 2 diabetes, right? I mean, you can, by reducing the amount of fat in the liver. It's dramatic. And I mean, the answer to your question is this is a life. I think increasingly we recognize this is a lifelong disease, right? This starts this fat accumulation in the liver, in the pancreas, around the heart, right? Um, it starts, for me, it started very early on. And, I would lose the weight, I'd gain the weight. And we certainly know that cardiovascular disease, I mean, starts in the 20s, in the 30s, and I mean, you can see it. I mean, that atherosclerotic, that inflammatory state, that in fact, this ectopic fat really in the liver releases a whole set of inflammatory molecules. I mean, that really stimulate the atherosclerotic process, and that starts really in our 20s and our 30s, right? And it increases. So I'd love to be able to intervene, very early on, right? Because I mean, I think that's, but I can't, and this is very real. I mean, when you look at the mortality studies, I mean, if you can take someone out, reduce the major cardiovascular risk factors, you can add about 5, 6 years of life and good years of life, right? If you can reduce, I mean, on a population-wide basis. Is it ever too late to reverse type 2 diabetes? Well, if to seek the benefits, I doubt it. I can't quantitate it, and I've not, I don't know the answer to it. But I certainly know, I mean, that if you have osteoarthritis, joint disease, just getting the weight off that stresses off those joints. I mean, we're going to see in this country a very large epidemic, I think, preserved ejection. Again, I don't want to get overly medical, preserved ejection heart failure, right? And I think that my sense is, I mean, even later on, there's benefit to be had by reducing that inflammatory state. I mean, on a whole set of organs.
So you talk about,
Somebody had a hand up, I think. I think Andy did. It's great seeing you.
Hey, David. No, you answered my question, but I do want to tell you that I heard this same presentation on NPR a couple of weeks ago, and I enjoyed it very much.
Oh, well, sorry if I'm repeating myself. I apologize.
No, it's done very well, very well.
yeah, you tie together so many things in your book, David. You talk about dopamine in the brain, and you talk about you actually coined the term ultra formulated foods because they're really just so designated with sugar, fat, and salt to grab us, like you said. Um, and going forward, you, since you raised the topic of behavioral therapy, is the use of these kinds of drugs going to become more common? Are we going to all be wearing glucose monitors that are now becoming so easy to insert in the subcutaneous?
So, I mean, I wore one just to see what it's like. I mean, I would strongly advise you not to do it because it'll drive you nuts. I mean, it's scary as all get out when you realize when you're, I mean, I don't know how many of you have tried these. Um, uh, Look, eat real food, don't eat ultra processed foods. And I mean, they certainly have very important for those, I mean, who you needed to decide on therapy, I mean, who are type 2 diabetic, or type 1 diabetic, absolutely critical. But if you really want to understand what's happening to your body, I mean, just experiment for 2 weeks. I mean, it is really eye-opening. I think we've had the privilege also, I don't know what people's experience is, but, we grew up in the 50s, right? And I think we've seen the changes in the food environment, in how we eat.
Let me raise two issues with you.
Please.
One is what about equity in terms of people who have access, A, to healthy foods, and B, to these expensive drugs?
Yeah. So, I mean, let me generate the biggest argument, on the ultra processed foods that we face. I mean, and I did this petition of late. I sort of rolled this, what's the right expression? I rolled this little grenade in front of RFK to petition to tackle this ultra processed foods. If you really want to make America healthy again, to tackle that. The industry, the food industry says, look, we designed these foods to achieve low cost. I mean, they're cheap. They provide that is a large part of the benefit, and no doubt that is true in the short run. But if you look at the profound costs of this, of what we're eating, I mean, and the cost of type 2 diabetes, of the heart disease, of the chronic kidney disease, sleep apnea, all these diseases. I mean, we take a lot of grief, I think, in this country, the medical profession, why we're so expensive, and why healthcare costs so high. And no doubt that they are, but we made ourselves pretty sick. I mean, and that costs a lot of money, right? So we got to figure out short-term and long-term costs. The GLP-1 drugs are, the economics of that. I mean, its own story. Industry price these drugs pretty exorbitantly at $1,000 a month. They've come down, maybe they're $399, $400, still more expensive than in other parts of the world. But what happened was there's this sort of loophole that allows they're not quite copycats, but they really are copycats. They're sort of gray market. They're compounded drugs that are being sold, and for like $200 a month. So that forced the industry to lower its price. The price of those drugs need to, and will come down dramatically. I mean, if I had a goal, and I don't know what the other docs on the call think, but if I had one goal from a public health point of view, we had the privilege of working on tobacco during COVID. I mean, if we can get people, if we can focus on three things: waist circumference, blood pressure, and lipids, and we have drugs for all three. Again, they're not panaceas. We can dramatically change the costs of healthcare in this country.
So let's turn to what you just kind of briefly mentioned. I know that you met with Kennedy recently, and as you said, rolled that grenade in front of him. Can you share what that meeting was like and how it was received?
Yeah, so let me tell you sort of what I did. It took me a while. You ever wonder, you had to go to law school, had to go do FDA stuff, had to write 3 books, and then all of a sudden it dawned on me, right? Was there a hook to be able to, from a policy perspective, to get a handle on this? And just by analogy, if you go back, I'll get to your answer in a second, Doug. You go back to tobacco. What happened in tobacco was when we got there, there was a citizens petition. Anyone could write a citizens petition, put it in front of FDA, that asked FDA to regulate low nicotine cigarettes as a drug. It was a little odd. Why do low low nicotine cigarettes as a drug, low tar cigarettes as a drug, actually. And so the question wasn't quite right. So we revised the question to not is are low tar cigarettes a drug, but is nicotine a drug? And that sort of gave us the regulatory hook, right, to begin the sort of, attack and go inside the industry. But it was that playbook to give the FDA a hook. And it took us 20 years to finally get, an Obama signed in 2009 that gave FDA control over cigarettes. But if you look, and it sort of happened in our lifetime, right? If you look back in the 1970s and 1980s, the food industry learned to extract out of food certain, components, including corn syrups and corn solids and all those terms, maltodextrin, and they made this whole sort of industrial palette of compounds that they were able to take, the structure of food, throw the structure away, the fiber and everything else that slows down eating, and take this energy dense, highly palatable stuff and recombine it into almost an endless amount of ingredients. And the food laws are pretty strict in this country. You can't add anything to food if it has to be reasonable certainty of no harm. Drugs are a risk benefit balance. Foods are just just has to be safe and reasonable certainty of no harm. And there was what I called, what I thought was an exception, right? Which was called the grass was a loophole. Because if you were generally recognized as safe, right, you didn't have to be a food additive, you didn't have to go through that process. So in the 1970s and 1980s, the food industry got all these, if you look at the ingredient panel, these corn syrups, corn solids, high fructose corn syrup, maltodextrin, xylose, all those ingredients in as grass, and which means it has to be general recognition of safety. And so I just, all of a sudden it dawned on me, I went back and I looked in the Federal Register, and there it was in the 1980s. It said that these, what they called them nutritive saccharides, right? These ultra processed sort of ingredients that no one uses. I mean, in the house, or rarely uses in the house, that are just used in these industrial formulations. The industry, took those ingredients and made this panoply, and the Federal Register says these things, there was no link to obesity, no link to diabetes, no link to cardiovascular disease. And I go, hold it. That was my agency, yes, before I got there. I mean, and saying none of this stuff was linked, and it was generally recognized as safe. You go back and you look at the current science, and the science shows a link. And the great thing about that GRAS provision, which I thought was a loophole, but really is a great tool, is if once you're GRAS, the burden stays with the industry for the lawyers, on the call, and it's a continuing burden, right? So if you're GRAS back then, the burden's not on the FDA, and if you're GRAS back then, you have to continue to show your GRAS. So all of it dawned on me, this stuff is no longer GRAS. So the legal basis, for much of this ultra processed food, this stuff got on because it's GRAS, but it's no longer GRAS. So that but there is, on some of these, there's actually a GRAS regulation. So the FDA has to withdraw that. And so the request for this petition, this in front of Kennedy, was, would FDA, these substances came on and the market under this provision, they are no longer GRAS, and FDA should revoke the GRAS status. And so that was sort of technical, but just like tobacco, it's a regulatory legal hook. Once you got the legal hook, then the industry goes, oh shit, we have no legal basis to stay, on the market. So, and again, so we focus specifically on these refined processed carbohydrates. You can talk about these added fats and oils. Ultra processed foods is a combination of these, refined sweeteners, these refined starches, and flours, these added fats and oils, and the salt, again, created this alternate universe. But by focusing on two of those, components, that those refined starches and and flours and sweeteners, that's sort of the underbelly. Walk through the supermarket and I mean, 80% of the stuff in the middle aisles will contain that stuff. Just look at the ingredient panel. So all of a sudden, the industry goes, oh shit, if the FDA does this, we have no legal basis to continue to sell this. And it's more, I mean, that has profound consequences, right? But it's the ability to actually, bring the industry to the
So,
table and get something done.
so what did,
We'll see.
what was the response of Kennedy to your laying this out?
Yeah. So look, this was there was a lot of discussion. I mean, in this house because, I mean, as you can imagine, and I'm not answering your question yet. If
Yes,
you notice I'm not answering your
you're right.
question.
You're doing good. Yeah,
But there was a lot of, you have this sort of dilemma because on vaccines, I mean, he and I couldn't be more on the opposite side, right?
right.
On biomedical research, we couldn't be on more the opposite sides. I mean, there's real damage being done. So do you make this decision to even play, because you can't give these guys cover at all. I mean, I don't mean to, from the vaccine side.
Yeah.
And again, I don't want to get political here, and I want to be respectful. But so the question is, do you even engage, right? Because if they do this, I mean, but the decision was from a public health perspective, look, you can't wait 3.5 years. I mean, the country's sick. Only 12.2% of this country is metabolically healthy. 25% of us are going to have a stroke. 30% are going to have diabetes. 25% of us are going to, end up in heart failure, right? I mean, in the end. So you got to keep the decision was, yes, we were going to engage on this issue. He was extremely cordial, very, very, very nice. Couldn't have been nicer. He had, this senior top HHS leadership, and we'll see. I hope he'll act on it. I have reason to believe he's interested. Let's put it that way.
That's great. Yeah, that's I mean, considering all you did with FDA, I mean, we're kind of getting into the whole what's happened. Talk to us a little about implication with what's going on with FDA and with CDC. I mean, CDC recent Susan Monterez was there for a month, and she got fired because she would not go along with all of the the new changes they want. They didn't want to vaccinate hepatitis B in children and fired the vaccine panel. And so where are we? Where's the health of our country now?
Look, I mean, I always believed there was a pendulum, right? I mean, the things I grew up as, I mean, we all grew up at the same time. I grew up at a time where public service, was something you wanted, was important to us. It was, Kennedy was president. And I always believed in going in to serve, but then leaving because I didn't want it. It's a kind of heady experience. And then, going back in, and you get your shot at trying to get things done, and then you leave and the public votes, and, the other guys are entitled to their shot, or, women, and they're entitled to, and the pendulum swings back and forth. And I sort of got used to that, right? I got sort of how this country, I think this time is different. I think it will, I went back for a second time during Warp Speed with none of the, I mean, I sort of ended up being the glue between FDA, NIH, and CDC because I was very senior, but I had no thought. It's only because people trusted me. And I had been there before, and I knew how those agencies were. I think the level of damage it's going to take years to be to recover. I mean, Kennedy, at one point said, I mean, again, I don't want to speak out of turn, and these are sort of private, but he said, he said, look, I want to disrupt that. And I said, look, you want to disrupt the regulation of drugs. I said, that's the last thing you want to do. I mean, if one thing if you want to do is take on food, take on these public health issues, there's so much we could agree on. I mean, we know what's making us sick, right? Take on what's making us sick, right? And you'll have this very strong public support. I mean, I don't think we should underestimate the extent to which the public, he has tapped into something about chronic disease and unhappiness. I wish somebody on this call would run for president and just focus on fixing healthcare. I mean, I think it's just get rid of prior authorization. I mean, the system is so fucked up. Sorry, right? But it's just so screwed up, right? And I mean, it doesn't have to. I mean, yeah, sure, it has to be. It's complicated and everything else. There's so much we could agree on here. But he's tapped into, and the reason I'm optimistic on the food stuff is they've polled this ultra processed food. I mean, the public gets it, right? The public is highly supportive, and it's sort of the political spectrums sort of start getting merged with the left and right on this stuff.
Okay. Well, we've covered a lot of things. I'm happy to.
So let me ask you a couple of questions on vision. Okay.
Okay.
You talk about a vision as we age, right? And you went on, right? I mean, you went to Boston, we were in school together in Boston after we left Western Massachusetts, right? You got your degree. You actually got it took me about 6 years to get my medical degree because I went off to get this other degree right? I couldn't, right? You graduated 2 years ahead of me, right? And you went on anterior, your residency and fellowship, and then specialized training, anterior part of the eye, right? And distinguished professor at Baylor. And so why did I wait so long to have my cataracts done? I mean, why? I mean, I couldn't see for years, right? I mean, it was harder and harder. And then, why do we wait so long? Is that because these lenses only work so? I mean, when should people do it? I mean, and let's just start with that disease, and then let's talk a little about these, the other diseases of vision and aging. Can I ask?
Well, yeah, I mean, everybody's lenses age at a different pace, and everybody's lenses also age in a way that kind of sneaks up on you, so you're not quite aware of where you are. So those are reasons that people wait. When I first started getting involved in anterior segment surgery, cataract surgery, the optical outcomes were not that great. And so people tended to wait longer, and there were more.
And that was part of the FDA, the intraocular lenses back in there were problems back, 70s, 80s, in the 90s, as late as what?
70s, exactly. And so lenses have gotten better, surgical techniques have gotten better, and we're now removing lenses from healthy adults in their 50s and 60s in certain instances just to correct their vision, I need thick glasses to see far away. I can't see anything up close. Those patients are actually good candidates to have their lenses removed. Some people, of course, some physicians will overdo that. But so for all of us, it's a lifestyle choice, I think, now more than anything else, assuming your eyes are healthy in other ways. Are your eyes bothering? Are they, impinging upon your enjoyment of your life? And, whereas before people used to wait till they were really hampered, now people come and say, and I can't see my golf ball, or, I'm having difficulty driving at night. Those are probably the two most common kinds of complaints that people bring to, and we have a good shot. Our data in my center, we're 90% within target. I mean, that patients don't need glasses for the target we choose. And so it's miraculous. And and the other part that's really gotten important is our lifestyle has changed in the fact that we need to see our phones. Everybody wants to see their phone. Any patient tells me they don't want to see their phone, I just dismiss the comment because it isn't true. Everybody does. And so when I do surgery, and a lot of my colleagues, we try to tailor the surgery to give patients the greatest amount of function without glasses. And we can do that more and more with various optical sort of solutions with the lenses we pick.
Does it make a difference who does the surgery? I mean, if you're having routine cataract surgery, should you, I mean, should you care about who does the surgery, honestly? And I mean,
There are lots of brilliant surgeons around. There are surgeons who operate at a little bit lower level, particularly with the kinds of measurements they do and the precision that they put to the measurements and the analysis of the data in selecting the lens implant. That's, to me, almost well, in fact, it is as challenging as doing the surgery. And that's where I've focused a lot of my research work, is on kind of perfecting that whole aspect of it, trying to get it improved.
and how long can you expect these things to last, these lenses?
Lifetime.
They
In
should
most
be able to last a
Yeah.
lifetime of,
I mean, the current biomaterials used for lens implants, they're acrylic. It's a piece of plastic, but they're so beautifully machined and polished, and the material is so exquisitely designed that they should provide crystal clear optical performance throughout the patient's lifetime. Unlike hips and knees and things that, because those things are a mechanical where things, there's one thing's rubbing against the other, pushing against the other. That's not true. This thing just sits in your eye and gives you this marvelous vision.
and just two other things that we could open up. Again, don't mean to put you on the spot. Um, the the other diseases associated with aging, as far as prevention, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the most important thing, I mean, the things you can do to prevent, I mean, what do we know about AMD, et cetera, or glaucoma? The diseases, what do you consider the diseases of aging as far as in ophthalmology? They are,
Glaucoma and macular degeneration are the two that we worry about.
right?
And
And what do we know on prevention? I mean, is there an atherosclerotic process that's part of AMD? Is it inflammatory? What is it? Do we?
we've the for everybody's information, the macular degeneration occurs when the retina in the center begins to break down, and the material accumulates under the retina. And then in certain instances that progresses and there's breakdown of the retinal tissue and people lose central vision. That's the dry form. There's a wet form where vessels grow under the retina and they bleed and leak, and there's a very dramatic and sudden loss of vision. That second form, now we now recognize there is an inflammatory component, and we use anti-VEGF injections, which prevent the new blood vessel growth. And that has been very successful in the wet form. The dry form, we recognize there's probably an inflammatory component, something to do with complement. And there are drugs that are just emerging now to try to retard the dry form, which generally just kind of clips along at its own pace. So macular degeneration is it's great and important to detect it early. It's not something necessarily you can do a lot about. Glaucoma, on the other hand, if detected early, can be treated. It can be prevented from causing vision loss. And it's really, there's nobody in this country who should lose vision from glaucoma. Unfortunately, it occurs all the time because of lack of access, or people just don't go see their doctors. Or
And
doctors sometimes miss it because it can be sneaky.
and there's two sets of visual sort of environments. There's the world we grew up in, and now we're in front of screens, and I mean all the time. And any sense of how to manage that optimally? I mean, just generally. Um, uh,
Well, there was a lot of back and forth about whether the computer screens were causing problems with our vision. As an adult, no. For children, yes, and that gets in the whole topic of the myopia epidemic. I mean, we are facing an unbelievable myopia epidemic in the world, that has yet to be controlled. And it's not just simply that people will need stronger glasses. Advanced forms of myopia are blinding diseases. They cause the retinal deterioration. They predispose to retinal detachment. So getting a handle on myopia in children and preventing it from occurring, because children are spending all this time near and they're not going outside to play with Sally and Johnny anymore, that has really had a huge impact.
Just say it again. I want to make sure I understand. And that is due to that advancing myopia, or is
It is due to all the near work that and the lack of getting outdoors and doing distance work that children are doing.
and that has consequences over a lifetime.
Yeah. Huge epidemic.
Gentlemen, I'm going to interrupt and try to open this up to the rest of the crowd, because I know others will have questions, and so if you've got questions, please either use the raised hand symbol or add them into the chat. I know David, if you might want to look at some of the comments, there's a couple comments in the chat about if we suddenly get rid of ultra processed foods, a whole lot of companies are going to go out of business, and people will complain that there's nothing to eat. But I'm not sure you can answer that question.
Let's tackle that. If you go to Italy, it's about 15% of their supermarket is ultra processed foods, right? Our country is about 70%, right? The industry knows how to reformulate foods. It may not know, all the science, excuse me. But we can have a flourishing, nutritious food supply without overloading ourselves with these rapidly absorbable glucose. I don't buy that argument. Bob, you want to read some of the other questions in the chat?
The other question talks about the obesity GPL-1 supposedly taking in duration of a person's life, otherwise a rebound, you get the weight back. They reference a company. Richard Saylor, Dick, why don't you say it yourself and just unmute yourself and ask the question directly?
Okay. Hello, everyone. This is great. Yeah, we have, I don't have any financial interest in this, but some friends of ours have someone working at this company called Fractal Health. And as I wrote in the chat, they have a procedure that's an outpatient endoscopic procedure to do something, maybe ablate some part of the duodenum, which will have a similar effect to the GLP-1 drugs. And they claim that people can take the GLP drugs and lose a lot of weight, but then they can get this procedure and then they won't need to take the drugs anymore. It's also supposedly good for type 2 diabetes. So I was wondering if that's well known in the community, David.
You're exactly right. These drugs are only work when you're on them, unless you can look. The real key to these drugs, and they are a very important set of drugs. Again, they are not a panacea. They're real. There's real side effects. But there's no doubt that they can reduce the food noise. They can counter the addiction while you're on them. The question is, can you use these drugs while you're on them to retrain your brain a little, to condition yourself? That's really the key to be able to do that, right? Now, the reality is, here's the data. The average person in this country is on these drugs for less than 8 months, right? But these drugs only work if you stay on them for the duration, right? Because I would always, what happened with me was, I gained the weight. I would lose the weight. I thought I was done when I lost the weight. And I didn't realize that when you lose the weight, that's the hard part of really keeping it off. So just understand, if the vast majority of people taking these drugs lose the weight and then gain it back, and you gain back fat greater faster than you gain back muscle, you're not going to be any. So you're absolutely right. This is only going to work. If we figure out that conundrum, and people are not going to stay on these drugs. I know the industry model is, people say, well, it's just like blood pressure. It's just like statins. But these drugs have, real adverse event profiles, and no one's going to want to be on these drugs for a lifetime. So my sense is we're going to have to learn how to use these drugs. And, my guess is people will go on these drugs, go off them, go back on them when they need to manage the process. But we need better techniques. I think the data on Fractal, the real ultimate, there's a clinical trial that's underway. We'll see how good it is. It is very interesting. This is all about absorption of these nutrients in the duodenum. I mean, this rapid absorption. So obviously that procedure is doing something at the rate of absorption, I mean, of how these things are getting absorbed. So from a biology perspective, I'm, enormously interested in it. If you look at the revision rate, just the most common bariatric procedure is this called something called a sleeve gastrectomy. I mean, and there's a failure rate of about 30%. So I mean, again, I'm not taking anything away from that field, but I think as Doug mentioned, I mean, the experience with intraocular lenses. I mean, it took ophthalmology 40, 50 years to perfect it. I mean, and get it to a point where, right, the kind of improvements. And I think, so it's great monkeying around. I mean, it's great that there's a range of tools, endoscopic procedures, but I mean, we're at the infancy of really understanding what's safe and what will work in the long term.
David Brown, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, David, there's evidence that these GLP-1 drugs decrease people's drinking. People who are habituated to drinking decreases that. Presumably, that's not by slowing gastric emptying. So I wonder what the mechanism there is, and if you think that ultimately, if this is a true finding, if they're going to be approved for that use as well.
Yeah, I think very interesting point. I don't think, just understand, when I say delayed gastric emptying, that there's still a gut-brain, to delay gastric emptying, there is a brain-gut interaction on that. It's the brain slowing that gastric emptying. So it's that aversive system. I think that aversive system, that general malaise, and it creates this, if I push you to that edge of abolition, right? Because I gotta, there is a reward system of this brain, right? I mean, of our brains. Addiction does exist. I mean, and it actually exists in all of us, right? Now we think of addiction as for the weak, the downtrodden, and it's only for certain people. But I think most of us can understand this sort of drive, this compulsive nature. Why do I keep on eating when I don't want it? There's a reward system, right? And alcohol is clearly part of that reward system. And I think the aversive system really can counterbalance that aversive system. I think the data is, we will see in the next 2 or 3 years more definitive studies. I think that this will probably have some effect and work for alcohol. I don't think it's going to work but I think it's going to work through that aversive system. I don't think it's going to work for shopping and gambling, is my guess.
Jim O'Brien.
Yes, nice to see everyone. David and Doug, both, thank you very much for the conversation. Very interesting. I once in a while read a little article about the connections between bacteria and gut health and all the rest of the health issues. Any comments about how that ties in with the GLP-1 drugs?
Wow, it's a profound question, and it's very real. Look, there is no doubt that the GLP-1 drug, I mean, the natural GLP-1, right? Not the drug, the agonist, but natural GLP-1 gets stimulated. If you can get food into the lower part of your gut, into your, the distal part, into the ileum and other parts, that's where the GLP-1 gets naturally stimulated. So there's a natural satiety there. I mean, and there has to be an interaction between all those, that microbiome, and those GLP-1 receptors. You could imagine what that bacteria is feeding and what they're releasing. I mean, I think that one of the most fascinating things that again, completely unrelated to this, but at one of the more recent AACR cancer research meetings, this rise in colon cancer, on a completely different note. I mean, there is a thought that there is a certain kind of coli that are giving off certain genetic signatures in that microbiome. that can interact with some of the GI mucosa that can transform those cells. So the thought even that there's certain bacteria that's involved in colon cancer, the complete, it's still pretty much a theory. But if you ever wanted a reason to be able to have high computing power, because to understand the genetics and everything going on, I mean, in that microbiome, that's what to be able to analyze the differences. But it has to be a big player, right? I mean, it has to be when you think about it, the inflammatory GI diseases, colon cancer. I mean, certainly eating the microbiome is going to be a big player. I don't think we've begun to really understand it.
There's a couple more questions in the chat. I'm going to repeat both of them. What are the likely harmful side effects of the GLP-1 drugs? And second one, which is on a sort of different tact, do more autocratic governments like China do a better job of controlling their food supply? Which is sort of an interesting notion.
So I feel comfortable on the first one. I'll let all the political scientists, economists answer the second one. So I mean there are there's serious GI adverse events. I mean they're primarily rare, I think. I mean, but anything that mucks up your GI system and GI motility, just think about it. It's going to give you constipation. You go, oh, who cares about constipation? But constipation can lead, I mean, to what's called an ileus, right? And where the bowel stops moving. You can have intestinal obstruction. You could have perforation. You could have sepsis. You could have pancreatitis. You could have gallbladder disease. There is, Doug, I don't know whether you've seen this yet. There's some thought that, I mean, it's unclear what the association, whether it's real, but the rapid drop in glucose, whether there's certain retinal disease is, I don't know whether.
Yeah, the couple of things that
Head,
come up
yes.
are the acceleration of diabetic retinopathy, and that happens with lowering the glucose dramatically in general. But the other has been there have been a few smattering of cases where patients actually had small strokes or major strokes in their optic nerves. The linkage is a little softer, but that's a kind of an ongoing concern about whether that risk is increased in patients taking the GLP-1 agonists.
Is there a sinologist who can talk about the China question?
No one's leaping forward.
I mean, but the one thing that they can do better than we can. I mean, and it is frightening. Let me just tell you, if you look at, and I know again what many of you think, I am struck by the quality. I never paid a lot of attention to it. Never thought it was high quality. You look at the quality of science coming out of China. I mean, in just in the metabolic areas. I mean, there's very solid, good work coming out. They are going to eat our lunch in the sciences. We grew up in a generation, right, where the National Science Foundation, the NSF, the post-Sputnik world, our country made an investment in the sciences and supported our careers, right? I mean, I remember going off to these science programs, I mean, during the summer, right? I mean, the Chinese are doing that now, and this attack on biomedical research and the lack of international students coming here. I mean, that is a real national security. We will lose our edge. If you look at the top 10 universities in the world rated by Nature, right? 8 are in China, only 1 or 2 are in the United States. I mean, and all these drugs. I mean, the real chemistry, the chemistry is being done in China. Right?
A statistic was pointed out to me many years ago by comparing the Chinese higher education system to the U.S. And the statistic that I recall that was most telling was if you took the top 10%, only the top 10% of all the college students in China, there were more of them than all of the college students in the United States combined, just in terms of numbers.
And that's
Um,
probably getting worse
and it's
because,
probably getting worse.
because of what's happening right now.
David Margulies, I saw you nodding your head with the China science thing. You want to weigh in on that, David?
I'm not a sinologist.
No, no, I wasn't. Wait, they had nothing to do with their food supply control
I,
or about their science.
I was just nodding my head. We've experienced. I have nothing to add to the observations.
So, but I have a question for David. Can I ask a question for David?
Yes, by all means.
So, can you fix healthcare?
No, can no, but I'm very happy to hear. Uh, I was going to send you a private note, David, but I want to do it publicly. I just wanted to thank you so much for the work that you have done and you are doing, the magnitude of the impact that you've had and are still having on public health. It's kind of difficult to overstate, in my view. So I just wanted to thank you.
Well, you're enormously kind, but I was serious, David. I mean, on that question.
No,
I mean, so can we change primary? I mean, primary care, getting access for people. I mean, if I care about getting people access to be able to control their blood pressure and their lipid drugs and their waist circumference, can you do that? I mean, will there be a real digital age that can do this algorithmically and safely? I mean, that's going to emerge over the next 10 years.
well, I think that the tools that are now available will so substantially redistribute expertise so that the right care path for individuals is widely accessible. So I think the technologies will be there, whether we create the educational systems and the cultural values to take advantage of it is a different question. But David, as I'm sure you know and are doing right now, those of us who have access to these emerging platforms can use these platforms to very rapidly evaluate complex patients and come up with straightforward paths to the future. When you combine the improved, some people are going past the word artificial intelligence and they're talking about it as HI, which is hybridized intelligence, the combination of experts and machines to just have greater precision. So we'll have the computational resources, and as I'm going to discuss next time we get together, the broader access to insights about our underlying genetic and genomic predispositions will be helpful. But David, I think you've been taking on the central issues, which are really motivational and social values and economics and political policy. And I think that those are the barriers to democratizing care.
Thanks. We look forward to that.
That might be a really good place for us to,
I was going to say, what a wonderful segue.
yeah.
All I can say is thank you to everyone who came. Let your classmates know. Thank you, David and Doug, for a wonderful conversation. And for
I put
everyone who asked-
Bob, I apologize. I put my email in the chat if anyone wants to continue this.
and thank you for that, David. This has been recorded, so it will be available on both our YouTube channel as well as on the alumni page for our class. They'll be posted in the next sometime in the coming week. So let your friends know that this is available, and I hope you'll all join us next month when our other Dr. David speaks, David Margulies. And everyone have a wonderful evening and a thankful Thanksgiving.
Let me
Thanks,
just
Bob.
add,
Thank you,
let me
Doug.
just
It's the privilege of doing this.
let me just add, I won't repeat everything Bob said so well, but if you enjoyed this, come back and see us again and tell your friends and have a great Thanksgiving. Some of us may eat a little less than we would have otherwise, and that would be a good thing.
Night all.
And I
Good night,
don't,
everybody.
thanks again, David.